Now that it's a couple of days after the Oscars, the news that broke today, the day we're recording this, is that they want to make an English language remake of Another Round.
Why?
Yeah. So Leonardo DiCaprio's production company, Appian Way, has sealed a deal to make the American remake of Another Round because, of course, Another Round, the Thomas Vinterberg Danish film, just won the Oscar for Best International Feature. So I guess capitalizing on the popularity of that movie and the fact that people recognize the title, Appian Way is deciding to do an English remake of this thing, which of course set off a bit of a firestorm on Twitter. And there's competing ideas over whether Leonardo DiCaprio himself would star in it in the Mads Mikkelsen role. I myself think that might be a bit of a miscast because Mads Mikkelsen is a handsome guy, but he's not Leonardo DiCaprio. And I don't know, might be a bit hard to believe a guy like Leonardo DiCaprio playing a sad sack high school teacher.
I see through his stupid shtick already. All Leonardo DiCaprio wants to do is to get drunk on set. That's why he wants to do this movie. He had too much fun on Wolf on Wall Street, and he's like, you know what? I just need to get hammered on set and have people film me the entire time. So let's do Another Round.
Yeah.
100%. That's totally what it was. If someone paid me so much money to just get inebriated and do like random wacko stuff, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I see through you, Leonardo DiCaprio. I know what you're up to. Welcome to the 94th episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love film and TV. My name is Jason Chen, and I'm joined by my co-host Robert Snow.
Hello, hello, hello.
And today we're going to be discussing the Oscars, which just happened recently. We're going to talk Mortal Kombat. We're going to talk Stowaway. And if we have a little time, we're going to talk about Captain Falcon. Winter Soldier and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, whatever the hell it is, the buddy cop TV show that Disney Plus just came up with. But Oscars, this is like Rob's second favorite holiday of the year after Christmas, maybe?
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. Because I'm the one who's always going around trying to figure out like, oh, did you watch it? Did you watch it? And 9 times out of 10 these days, the answer is usually no, whether I'm talking to Jason or I'm talking to someone at work or whatever the case may be. And that situation was kind of borne out in the ratings this year because when the dust settled on Monday morning and the TV ratings came in, they took a 58% hit on ratings from the year before. So that's a bit depressing.
Right. The first time they had less than 10 million viewers on Nielsen.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how they calculate it, but I mean, either way, a 58% drop is pretty damn significant.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of awards ceremonies this particular year that have taken big hits, like the Emmys and the Grammys are also looking at far worse numbers than they otherwise would. So time will tell whether it's just like a COVID related dip or if we're actually seeing a trend. I can definitely see why some people may have felt the desire to kind of skip it because, maybe they didn't see all the best pictures this year. Maybe the kind of the weird distribution methods that every company was using to get their nominees out there, maybe they weren't connecting with people. Maybe there was too many other interesting things to watch on streaming.
Well, I have to say, though, as we have learned over the years, that people who are in the voting body don't even see all the films every year.
Yeah. That's why I have to hand it to outlets like IndieWire and Hollywood Reporter and others who write up these anonymous Oscar voter interviews. And they do give you a bit. I mean, obviously they're only talking to a handful of voters out of the thousands that are in the Academy, but oftentimes it is a nice little kind of glimpse into the thought process that goes into choosing some of these awards and
or lack thereof.
Yeah. And oftentimes it boils down to like, petty feuds or, somebody's not going to vote for somebody else just because they disagree with the category that nominee's been placed into. It gets really esoteric and complicated and a little bit laughable, honestly. But this year's show, I know you didn't watch it live. I did. My brother and I tuned in for the whole thing. And a lot of people were talking the next day about how weird it was. So did you go through any like highlight reels or anything like that to kind of pick out some of the moments that people were obsessing over?
Yes, I did. A couple. So I don't know where you wanted to start first, but Yoon Yo-jung, the part where she asked Brad Pitt, where were you when we were filming in Tulsa?
Right.
That was probably the highlight for me. There was the Daniel Kaluuya acceptance speech where he thanked his parents for doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I think he stole from Ashton Kutcher when he won some sort of award at the Teen Choice Awards.
Okay.
Like hottest male or something, and he thanked his parents for doing it and their genetics or whatever. So that didn't feel as original as Yoon Yo-jung's little dig at Brad Pitt.
Right.
So the thing I heard that struck me as most awkward and weird was that they had cut out the highlight reel introducing the nominees for each category. Is that true?
For a lot of the movies, yeah, they did. Or for a lot of the categories, they did. Yeah. They determined that they wanted to only have clips for like quote unquote major categories, but even then it was severely reduced. So we got clips for best animated feature, we got clips for best international feature, and then we got clips for best picture, obviously, and I think maybe the 2 lead acting categories. But everything else was totally trimmed back.
And it still took 3 hours to get through.
They still nudged just north of 3 hours. And now this is also happening inside of a show that does not have the usual musical performances. All of the musical performances were pre-recorded and spliced into the red carpet stuff that came before, partially due to COVID stuff because they didn't want to have live singers belting it out and kind of potentially
spitting on everyone.
Yeah, potentially spraying COVID into the air. That would have been a bad time. So that part of it made sense, but they did. By cutting out all the musical performances, they managed to rescue, quote unquote, a huge amount of runtime, which they then reassigned to the speeches. So a lot of the speeches that would normally have been cut off at the 60-second mark or the 90-second mark were allowed to go on at length. Thomas Vinterberg was allowed to talk for a full 4 minutes when he won for Best International Feature. Which was great too in his case because he had a really touching story about the making of that particular movie.
Right. Because his daughter died in a car accident while they were filming.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I did hear that. Okay, so the biggest controversy was at the end.
Yes.
Where traditionally the last award to be given out is Best Picture, and that makes a whole ton of sense. And this year, though, the last award given out was for Best Actor, and from what I've heard, 1, Anthony Hopkins wasn't even there.
No.
And 2, there was no acceptance speech.
No, there was not. So it went, as soon as Best Picture came up, everyone was confused. Like, if you looked at the reaction on Twitter, everyone was asking, like, is something going wrong? Is this, like, kind of like the 2018 Moonlight fiasco? Like, what's happening? Is there some sort of, like, did they award the lead actor and actress trophies during the commercial break or something? Nobody knew what was happening. And essentially what the producers of the show had determined was that they earnestly thought that Chadwick Boseman was going to win and that they would be able to close the event out on this huge emotional high of a highlight reel of his best work and the acceptance speech by his wife and I guess maybe his daughter who they've been accepting awards for him throughout this whole award season. But it turned out to be Anthony Hopkins who won lead actor. So
who wasn't even there?
He wasn't even there. He was in Wales, where he's from, where he has his house. And apparently he had offered to join the ceremony over Zoom. But the Academy had outlawed Zoom acceptance speeches.
Why?
Their rules were, I don't know. I think they were worried because there were some technical glitches with Zoom at other awards shows this season. And they were worried that it would cut out partway through or it would ruin the experience. They wanted to preserve the kind of glamour of the Oscars, right? So their alternative this year was like, they said, all right, if you can't be in LA at this other venue that we're using for the show, you have to go to a satellite location closer to where you live. So they had satellite feeds going in Paris and Berlin and London, all over the place. And a lot of the people who ended up winning ended up going to those, and they would do acceptance speeches over satellite. So that was fine. But Zoom was like a no-go. And for some reason, I guess the trip between Wales and London for Anthony Hopkins would have been too much. So, you know, he was told, no, you can't do it. And they just closed out the ceremony with his headshot on screen. The award presenter said, oh, he can't join us, so we'll accept the award on his behalf. Then the camera panned over to Questlove, who is the DJ for the night, and the whole thing ended on a whimper. It was something.
So apparently Olivia Colman was supposed to do the acceptance speech on Hopkins' behalf.
I heard that as a rumor, but then I think another person shot that down because they said that she was in the satellite location in London because she'd been nominated for Best Supporting Actress, but apparently she's been busy working on a new film, so she was only there for the category where she stood a chance of winning, and then apparently she left the satellite location after that, so she didn't stick around for the...
Oh, okay, because I was gonna say, like, had she been, accepting the award on behalf of Hopkins, we would have gotten another epic Oscar speech from her, probably.
Yeah.
And that would have been a great way to end it. But that kind of goes to the heart of why no one watches the Oscars. One, as you mentioned before, I think this year, especially this year, because so many like big name movies got pushed back, I think a lot of people didn't see a lot of these films. One, they were even hard to track down for us, and we were actively looking for them.
True.
And second is, like, the Oscars have always been sort of like self-congratulatory. And I think, especially in this environment, I think people just are sick of it and they have way better things to do. Like, if you think about the amount of programming or streaming services that you can watch instead of the Oscars, I think the Oscars are probably at the bottom of the list. And that's part of why I kind of stopped watching it over the years. One, I got sick of it. Two, there were just way better things to do. They talked apparently when they were preparing the show of trying to make the ceremony feel like a movie. And it definitely worked in the beginning, but then as soon as the awards show format took over and they were like, all right, coming up next, that's when the movie artifice kind of faded away and it started to feel like that. All right, buckle up. We got another 2 hours of this to go. Did you feel like, as a fan of the Oscars and the whole thing, did you feel that this was a show where you felt more bored than usual, or you didn't feel as excited personally? Occasionally,
yeah. And now, granted, like it was also a different experience because I was streaming the show on my desktop. I was doing a live Zoom call with my brother who was watching it at the same time as me, as well. We're living in different places.
21st century for you.
Yeah, and so I was getting the communal aspect of having a quote unquote Oscar party because my brother was on the line, but because we weren't watching it together in the same room like we would at a typical Oscar party, or what we would normally do is we would go to a local movie theater here in my neighborhood and we would watch it with a group of like 20 or 30 other people. So stripped of all of that stuff and that kind of communal aspect, I think I was more distracted, and my brother and I just spent more time talking to each other than really paying attention to the speeches or anything.
So, I mean, I think we should just kind of run through the winners first. We talked about Hopkins. He was, I think, one of the bigger surprises of the night because there weren't that many surprises.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me that, the voting body voted for the old white dude, but I'm a little curious how this happened because I know that he was good and I know that the father had quite a bit of support, but I really thought Boseman had this in the bag.
Yeah, so did I. I mean, when I published my predictions about a week ago on the site, I listed Boseman as my pick too. A bunch of other leading awards predictors did the same. I think maybe I'm not in the minds of the Academy, but part of me wonders if it's that kind of posthumous aspect to it. Like, given the choice, do you reward somebody for their entire body of work and kind of lament the fact that they've passed away? Or do you give the award to someone who's still alive while they can actually like cherish it? And of course, like even the number of total posthumous wins in the entire history of the Oscars is very, very low. I think when Heath Ledger won for Dark Knight, it was he was only the second time that anyone had ever won posthumously. So
I think so. And also, I think that year he was the runaway. Like, he was clearly a cut above everyone else. This year, it was very debatable. I think you could make the case for all of them, not necessarily like equal case, but I think all of them could win.
Yeah. And I think too, there's also an aspect of like, weighted voting in some of the Oscar categories. I can't remember if lead actor is one of those, but it can be a thing where like if you vote for somebody and they don't get enough votes, like the votes for that person can be then moved up to another person higher on the tier. I think maybe that's just a shortlist thing. I'm very fuzzy on how that all works, but it's definitely possible that like, you know, the fact that it was a tighter race with Riz Ahmed in there too. A lot of people really like Sound of Metal. Sound of Metal picked up awards in other categories. Like
what were the other surprises for you?
Well, I was kind of surprised that Chloe Zhao didn't get it for Best Adapted Screenplay for Nomadland, and instead it went to the screenwriters of The Father. But then again, that little reversal also suggests that The Father had a little bit more support with the voting body, which then kind of goes a little bit towards the lead actor situation. But yeah, honestly, other than that, there wasn't a lot of surprises. A few of my predictions didn't come true. Like I thought that that My Octopus Teacher wasn't going to win Best Documentary, but you know,
I couldn't make it through it.
Yeah,
I really couldn't. Did you make it through?
No. I watched two of the other nominees. I watched Time and Crip Camp, but I didn't start Octopus Teacher.
So my mom watched My Octopus Teacher, and she liked it, and one of my cousins liked it too. I can't get through stuff like that. You know, stories about people. Not that I hate stories about people and their relationship with animals, because I liked Free Willy. But like, it seems a lot of times it seems a little, you know, I don't want to say fake, but it seems a little dramatized.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I feel about it. It feels a little so outlandish that it feels made up.
But then like when you look at the broad kind of the way all of the categories worked out, again, there was a pretty good distribution of stuff. Like Sound of Metal picked up a couple, Nomadland picked up a handful, Ma Rainey, like there was no movie that swept it. We've been seeing very few sweeps in recent years after they've changed around the categories and diversified the voters a little bit. So I felt there was a pretty good distribution of awards, and of course Nomadland went home with Best Picture, so that they were the front runner anyway. That made sense. And it was nice to see Chloe Zhao be only the second ever woman to win Best Director and the first ever Asian American woman. So
Nomadland is a great film. I just don't think it'll be remembered that well because, one, not many people have seen it, and two, just the subject material itself. It's a bit of a slower burn. It doesn't just grab you. It kind of really just kind of creeps up on you. Yeah,
well, a lot of people have very rightly been drawing comparisons between Zhao's work and Terrence Malick. So,
right.
And not to say that she's like a clone of Malick or she's the successor to Malick or anything like that. She's doing different stuff, but there are certain similarities in the way she shoots and the kind of way she cuts things together and stuff like that. Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting dimension to it, and but it also speaks to what you were saying about how the Nomadland isn't the kind of movie that just sort of hits you with an emotional punch. It's something that kind of works its way over you over time.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting when she does Eternals.
Yeah.
That's like a really big jump from Nomadland.
Yeah, I really don't think you're going to see that kind of like fluid editing or handheld camera work in the Eternals so much because, you know, as we know, a lot of indie directors get pulled into the Marvel family and are just, you know,
right.
End up being a name on the poster.
Right. Well, speaking of great films, we both saw Mortal Kombat.
Oh, yeah. Speak for yourself.
You really didn't like it, eh?
I didn't hate it. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So like squarely in the middle. I just felt it was very mediocre.
It was very meh. Yeah, it was very meh. I would implore you to watch the first movie with Robin Cho and compare the two, or even watch Annihilation. Annihilation is actually pretty good fun. I actually think I enjoyed Annihilation, which is the sequel. It's a lot more goofy. It doesn't take itself as seriously. It definitely doesn't have the same type of special effects, but I think it was very self-aware in that regard. So, but anyway, back to the new Mortal Kombat.
That dragon marking? I think it's an invitation to fight for something known. As Mortal Kombat.
Were you a big video game fan of this as a kid?
No, I mean, we were more of a Nintendo household. So
Well, it was on Nintendo.
or like later Nintendo, like 64, or not even 64. I think we really got started with GameCube, honestly. But
okay.
But yeah, like we never got into the side-scrolling fighting games at all, really. And played them occasionally if we were over at a friend's house or something like that. So I didn't really know the characters very well. I knew watching the trailer for this version before it came out. I mean, I knew enough through pop cultural osmosis that I was like, oh, okay, the blue guy is Sub-Zero and the yellow guy is Scorpion. Like, I knew
You're right.
I knew that much. I'd seen clips of the 95 adaptation, so I knew about Prince Goro and his four-armed ridiculousness.
Right.
That kind of thing. But this movie seems to... It's definitely adding some stuff to the mythology or reinterpreting a certain amount, because from what I've heard of the 95 version, this goes a little bit deeper into lore and
a little bit
world building to an extent, although it's not super successful at that either.
No, so I think you and I would agree that probably the best part of the movie was the first 7 minutes.
Yes. Yeah.
The prologue, where they introduce Sub-Zero and Scorpion, basically. No surprise that it has probably two of the most accomplished actors on the cast in that set.
Yeah, Joe Taslim and Hiroyuki Sanada.
The 7-minute prologue is basically what you expect from this film. It is about two people who, for whatever reason, really hate each other. It's really not important, but they have this like epic fight scene, and they have these like really epic superpowers. I wouldn't even call them superpowers, just like crazy martial arts stuff. Sub-Zero maybe has superpowers, and I think the film just really hits off on a really high note. And maybe that's why they released the first 7 minutes on YouTube for free, just to catch your attention, because it kind of goes downhill from there. And a big reason why I think it goes downhill is because of a character named Cole Young, which is central to the movie and also the central reason why this movie kind of stunk.
Yeah, so you got this guy who's supposed to be the audience proxy. He's supposed to be the one who all the other knowledgeable characters explain the rules of the universe to. So he's just like a generic fighter guy who's described as being kind of down on his luck. He's not as...
he's a chosen one.
But he's a chosen one. He's got this Mortal Kombat logo birthmark that identifies...
Which is hilarious.
Yeah, and he says, oh, I've had it since I was born. And of course, that gets further tied into Scorpion's story, blah, 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 descendant of Scorpion, blah, 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 blah.
Loosely, because he doesn't even become the Scorpion.
No, yeah. And... but he's presented early on as being the kind of guy he's not ready to go as far as it takes, and he's always tapping out, and that's kind of the only real like character trait that gets returned to later on and used for any kind of arc. It's not very long until he runs into Jax, who's another character from the games. They have a showdown with Sub-Zero. Sub-Zero's trying to kill Cole Young because they're some sort of plot about like the world that Sub-Zero is from. What's it called again? Outworld?
Yeah, Outworld.
Outworld has won 9 of the past 10 Mortal Kombat mystical fighting tournaments. And if they win the 10th one, they'll be able to invade Earth. And Earth has got to stop this invasion. They've got to win at least one tournament before Outworld can do this. And so then Sub-Zero comes, and like the idea being if he kills Cole Young and the other people with this birthmark, the tournament can't happen, and Earth's chances will be nil. So fine.
Can I just say that Cole Young sounds like the name of a protagonist from a trashy young adult novel?
Yeah, that's accurate.
It is so generic. It is in some ways sexually ambiguous. Yeah. And the last name Young itself just like really gives you the feeling of this young hero, this young dumb hero who's supposed to go through this arc. Now, so from what everything I've read says that this Cole Young character was studio interference, that they, again, wrongfully assume that the audience is stupid and that we need some sort of proxy to understand what's going on. If you look at the two previous Mortal Kombat movies, they made characters from the video game, the central characters. So they just picked a couple of them and said, you know what, let's go with their POV. Not this. And unsurprisingly, his story is the worst story. Unsurprisingly, his power is also the lamest power. I don't care for spoilers because it's just whatever. At the end of the movie, all these fighters on Earth manifest like superpowers, basically. And his superpower is basically a sort of shield that he can covers himself in. It's like Colossus, but not really.
Yeah, or like Black Panther's suit, the one that can absorb energy and then redirect it. That's kind of what it's doing.
Yeah, and he's supposed to be a descendant of Scorpion, but he shares zero similarities to Scorpion other than looking kind of Asian. I gotta say, like, other than that part, though, like the rest of the film doesn't offend me. Maybe the violence does a little bit, but and the Australian dude Kano offends me a little bit because his language gets tiresome. But other than that, there's a big middle sequence where they're still training and preparing for this fight. And I think for the most part, that's well done. There's a lot of Easter eggs from people who played the video game. But I thought some of the characters were actually legitimately interesting. But like any first movie, you don't spend a lot of time with them.
Continually, like, and this is what really makes it feel mediocre, is like, they'll have some good ideas, but then they'll put them together in the worst order. Like they will do so. Like I remember this really awkward edit partway through after they've found Raiden's temple. Raiden is this elder god who had these lightning powers, who's the chief explainer of everything. The bad guys are able to just seamlessly infiltrate this supposedly secret sanctum, and then they come and they have this bit of a stare down, and the editing there was so choppy it really felt like it had been glued together after a couple of test screenings. And then they start talking about the arcana, this like special powers, which they're supposed to be like direct screen representations of abilities that you would have in the video game. So like Sonya Blade gets these purple light rings that are fired from her fists, which it's a power that she acquires off camera because she beats Kano in a fight, despite the fact that the entire lead up in the movie to characters unlocking these powers, it's supposed to be like a deep spiritual experience. So we're told that like these arcana are supposed to be tied to their soul and it's supposed to be a real achievement when they get them. But then when Sonya Blade gets hers, she just sort of warps into a fight and she's like, oh, I got this while you weren't looking. Haha.
I think there were a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies throughout.
Yeah, just like broken motivations and like, you know, things that we were told are important are not as important as they eventually turn out to be.
Right. And I was just going to say, I think the perfect microcosm of that is Liu Kang's weird British whatever accent he's got going on. Supposedly this fighter from a Shaolin temple speaks with a weird sort of British accent. I don't know if you caught that. It was kind of weird. And I think Chin Han, who plays Shang Tsung, who's like the villain of this entire thing, he doesn't really get a chance to be a sniveling villain, eh? Like he really doesn't get to really dig his like teeth into something meaty and make it really fun. It seems like at certain points it really tries to take itself seriously, which is not a bad thing because the fights were awesome, especially the last one. But there are other parts where you're just like, I can't believe this is happening. Let's just get a move on. And I think one of the funniest scenes is the fight between Cole Young and Goro at the barn house.
Right.
At no point did I really feel, you know, nervous or excited. I just kind of felt like, wow, this is kind of dorky. Like this is what, you know, a teenager would want in a film that stars two of his favorite video game characters, where it's just like ridiculous sequences, a very poor understanding of which fighter is stronger and how each of them are able to defeat each of their opponents, because at the end they all kind of splinter off, and they kind of talk about how, you know, each person should fight this person because they're a good match. But at no point did they really flesh out any of the sort of like, maybe other than Kano, sort of like the personal grievances they have with each other.
Yeah.
So at the end, you're just like, oh, well, I mean, it's cool to see, but I don't feel anything at all other than Sub-Zero and Scorpion. And that's only because you had that 7-minute sequence that set up everything.
Yeah.
And that they don't return to for another hour and a half.
Yeah, like newsflash, character development actually makes you invested in fights. Who would have realized? Right.
I didn't have as much problem with the gore as I thought I would. That was my primary concern. Because I stopped playing Mortal Kombat when it was basically Super Nintendo, and I've seen clips of the Mortal Kombats on the next gen systems. And when it comes to like, you know, people getting stabbed through the eye, hearts getting ripped out, people get punched in the crotch or shot in the crotch, that's just too much for me. And I'm kind of glad that the movie didn't go there. And I think they actually made an effort to make it look like video game violence. They didn't try to make it too realistic.
True, yeah. I mean, there's only maybe 2 or 3 really gory kills in it, which from my taste came way too late. I mean, for a Mortal Kombat themed movie, you'd think that the fatalities would be closer to the front,
right?
Compared to some of the stuff that we've gotten used to seeing on, say, The Boys or the new Amazon animated show Invincible. The gore definitely felt toned down a little bit more. Did this get an R? It must have gotten an R.
Yeah. With the F-bombs that Kano drops, of course it did.
Right, yeah.
Even when, Kung Lao grabs that bat lady and rips her in half with his little saw thing. Yeah. Even then, that looked very much like a video game, gore and violence, and that didn't bother me as much. Anything more than that probably would have, but I was surprisingly okay with it.
Honestly, I can only really recommend this to people who are hardcore fans of the series, because for casual action fans, it feels like just a missed opportunity.
Yeah, a little bit. I agree with you there. I'm actually surprised you went to 2.5 out of 5, because I'm about the same, and I might go even lower. I expected it to like it more than you, just because I guess I'm more invested in the franchise. My favorite character was always Sub-Zero, so I'm glad they did him a little justice. He's literally the coolest character in Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, I mean, I think I went 2.5. Just some of the production design was solid. It looked like a significant upgrade from previous movie iterations. So
right,
they were clearly, in certain areas they were spending the budget well. In other areas, not so much.
Does this get a sequel? They clearly set it up for one.
Clearly they did, yeah. I don't know how the money's working these days in Hollywood. I don't know how they're making decisions over whether something is profitable enough to generate a sequel or not.
Right, okay. I think it will. I think, if anything, they'll make a little bit of money. But I think if there's enough interest, especially with Sub-Zero, I think there will be a sequel of some kind. I don't know if it'll be direct to streaming or whatever it is, but I think there will be some kind. Speaking of cold, though, you saw another space movie.
Yeah, the cold is the vacuum of space. This is a movie called Stowaway, directed by Joe Penna, who we've talked about here on the show. He had a movie that came out in 2018 called Arctic with Mads Mikkelsen.
Another cold movie.
Yeah, and it's, there's more than a few themes shared between these movies. Like we said, there's this kind of cold theme. In Arctic, it was literally just Mads Mikkelsen for the vast majority of the screen time. And then in this new movie from Joe Penna, he upgrades from 1 core cast member to 4. So he's kind of working his way up the ladder. I mean, who knows how long it'll take him to get to what most people would consider to be a fully casted movie. But the whole idea here is it's supposed to be a very tight drama aboard a 2-year mission to Mars.
Hi, Michael. I'm Marina Barnett, the commander of the ship. Do you remember what happened on the pad?
I'm a launch support engineer, ma'am. How long was I out?
We took off about 12 hours ago.
12 hours? I need to get back to my sister, please. My sister, she's alone, please. I gotta get back.
We're not going back.
What do you mean we're not going back? This is a 2-year mission.
The action opens on the launch sequence when these 3 astronauts, played by Anna Kendrick, Toni Collette, and Daniel Day Kim, are, counting down from 10. They're ready to launch, but then only about a minute into the launch, they suddenly realize that their engines are not performing as efficiently as they should, which they're a little bit spooked by. That's a little bit of a problem if you're burning a bit too much gas, but they're not entirely sure what's causing that. So they proceed on to their main ship and they dock with it. They get ready to take off from Mars, and they're planning to spend 2 years going there and coming back. And when they're far enough away from Earth that they can't return to Earth because they would need to refuel on Mars. They're committed to their journey at this point. Suddenly they discover the titular Stowaway, a guy named Michael, played by Shamir Anderson, who has been sealed inside the life support system of the ship through mysterious means. We never really figure out why he's in there, how he came to be in there, how they managed to get through the entire launch sequence and out to 12 hours away from Earth without noticing that he was missing on the ground and could possibly be aboard this ship.
So when that was revealed in the trailer, and they actually do reveal it in the trailer, I just laughed so hard. I was like, there's no way I can get on board with this movie. It is so ridiculous.
Even though you knew the title was Stowaway?
Well, yeah, but I mean, sometimes, do you remember the movie Sunshine? Mm-hmm. And that had a stowaway character on board too, right?
Yeah.
But they hid it very well. And in this one, there's a stowaway, but it could have meant a number of things.
Right.
But when they revealed that there was actually a dude stuck behind a panel that was drilled in...
Yeah.
That's when it lost me. That's when I was like, this is the most ridiculous and poorly implemented space mission ever. How could you be so careless?
Yeah. So then the interesting part, and I'm kind of with you on this because it did, the fact that they never really bothered to investigate the circumstances of that screw up is a bit of a black mark against the movie because it's the one thing that you're wondering about the most and they don't ever return to it. Mm-hmm. So they kind of use the fact that it's very implausible and evidence of like shoddy preparation as a bit of a dig against the private spaceflight company that's running this mission. And this company is called Hyperion. And it's pretty obvious that they're kind of taking a bit of a pot shot at SpaceX and Elon Musk. They never really come out and say anything deliberately referential to stuff that has happened with SpaceX, but the fact that it's a major mission funded by a private company is kind of enough, if it's coming out in this day and age. But we never actually hear from Hyperion. We don't ever hear the voices of the people on the ground in mission control. They're always kind of this unseen entity that Toni Collette, the pilot, is talking to over comms. And, once they get into this mission, the process of discovering Michael in the life support system damages the system and they're running out of oxygen, and suddenly they have an extra passenger aboard and they're running out of oxygen even faster than they would otherwise. So they're scrambling to kind of find ways to, rely on backup systems. And Daniel Day Kim plays a biologist who he has to use the algae that he was planning to study on Mars to start generating oxygen for them as a failsafe. And it becomes a survival in space movie, which is fine. But the movie is like, it's just shy of 2 hours and it's trying to deal with all of this kind of morality of survival in space. Like, Michael is put forward as a possible candidate for essentially being euthanized. Like they have to kind of go that route and say like, oh, well, he was dead the second he lifted off. He wasn't supposed to be here. I guess we'll just have to kill him. And that's supposed to play on the crew's minds and kind of stress them out and obviously, cause a quandary for them. But I think the script is just, it's a little bit too thin. It doesn't really dig into what this would really do to people mentally if they had to make this call.
I feel like it's partly because we've seen this scenario before in other space movies. Like, not just a person stuck on board, but the lack of resources and what to do and what sacrifices must be made.
Yeah. So
we kind of saw that in The Martian, whether to save Matt Damon or not. And of course, in every movie, we have to save Matt Damon because he's Matt Damon. I think because the cast is a little too well known. Correct me if I'm wrong, but does Anna Kendrick play this sort of neurotic medical doctor who has a heart of gold?
Yes. Yep.
And Daniel Day Kim is this like really smart, charismatic Asian.
Yes.
And Toni Collette has this sort of edge to her.
Yes.
But she is very rational.
Yes.
And very much the leader of the group.
Yes.
So like right away, like if you can guess the character and the relationship dynamics like that, it really takes away a lot of the suspense.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, the most they really do in terms of trying to reflect the tension of their decision is having a couple of scenes where they kind of all each individually go off on their own like private sections of the spacecraft and kind of have a weeping scene, and they're kind of like supposed to be communicating how sad they are, but then they've got to kind of throw themselves back into it. And I guess, you know, you can make the argument that these characters are supposed to be like exquisitely trained, and they're supposed to be able to handle any obstacle that presents itself and, you know, deal with it with professionalism and not get too emotionally wrapped up into it. But that doesn't make for a very involving character.
No.
Because if they're so cold and analytical, and if they're so able to handle these decisions in the moment, you're kind of like, oh, okay, they're a bit robotic, you know?
Right. All the space movies that had good character relationships was about the humanity of the characters, right?
Yeah.
It's about like what goes beyond than just the science.
Yeah.
It's always about, you know, yes, the survival of the human race, but interpersonal relationships are always really important. And I don't know if they discuss this at all, but I would be curious, and I'm just spitballing here. The Stowaway is a black person. I wonder if at any point in the film screenplay or at any point during a writer's discussion, if they had bandied the idea of, you know, 3 non-black astronauts killing off a black dude in space.
Yeah. That went through my mind at least once.
Yeah, I think it would have been a timely sort of discussion in this sort of day and age about, you know, not just the resources and how to allocate it, but the perception of things, about how this sort of action would be perceived by people who are not part of the situation.
Yes, and especially since we're dealing with the mission that's run by a private company, which would be accountable to shareholders and to the
right.
people on Earth who are tracking the mission. All of that is kept away from us. We're supposed to focus just on these 4 people in this space capsule. Nothing else matters. And you know, I can also kind of understand that from the filmmaker's perspective, they're trying to tell this very tight story, and they're very economical with it. You know, I mean, they come up with all kinds of ways to save budget. Like you know, the spacecraft generates its own artificial gravity, so they don't have to waste any money having the actors floating around on wires. Like, it's very, very, very spare and very economical. So I have to give them a thumbs up for that. At least they were, you know, coming up with clever solutions to budget problems. I think it does eventually have a bit of a ripple effect on the drama and the tension. And so at the end of it, you're like, oh, okay, you know, the ending doesn't really hit with the punch that I think it was meant to.
Right. Final score?
Final score. I wrote up a review for the site, which you can check out if you want a little bit more info. I went to 2.5 out of 4. So, and then on like a 3 points or on a 5 point scale, maybe 3.5 out of 5. So not terrible. The Martian is definitely more of a crowd pleaser. Gravity is way more technically competent. So those ones are standing a cut above. But there's plenty of other cheap space movies out there that you could waste your time on. So if you got to pick something new, this is probably a decent bet.
All right. Do we have some time to talk about the Falcon?
Yeah, Captain Falcon.
Captain Falcon. Captain Falcon.
FALCON punch!
So this is a show that just finished, a 6-episode miniseries, I would call it, with episodes ranging from anywhere from I think 40 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
Follows the adventures of the Winter Soldier, played by Sebastian Stan, and the Falcon, played by Anthony Mackie.
Buck, I have a plan. Oh, yeah? What is it? Is you ready?
Here we go again, huh?
We've been grinding hard on the job. Can't take that from us.
I gotta say, this was an interesting concept. I think because it tried to be many things, it ends up falling short sometimes in certain areas. So one of the things that kind of falls short is they tried to market this as sort of like a buddy cop comedy. And I have to say, though, it kind of doesn't work because neither Sebastian Stan and Anthony Mackie are very funny.
Okay.
I think there's some obvious chemistry between the two. But there's a scene where the Winter Soldier is helping Anthony Mackie's family, or the Falcon's family, fix up this fishing ship that's been held in the family for a long time. And because the Winter Soldier is this assassin, he doesn't really quite know what he's doing. So there's supposed to be some mishaps here and there and some miscommunication. None of that part in that montage was funny at all.
Okay.
Unfortunately. What the show does a really good job, though, is make a commentary about race politics and social politics, and the idea of what we ask of people, and the duties and the responsibilities that we place on them that are sometimes difficult to handle on their own. There are sometimes issues that are way bigger than themselves. So one of the central premises is the idea of Captain America's shield and what it represents. And I think if there is a reason to watch the show, it's to watch Anthony Mackie navigate this journey from being, a guy who doesn't really want to be the guy. He doesn't want to be the Captain America, the guy who takes over for Steve Rogers, who by all accounts was this great all-American hero. And in some ways, and they talk about this in an episode too, betray his own race, because historically speaking, black people in white USA have been mistreated, slavery being a big one, and swept aside. So there's a little sort of reckoning and some ideas about that I think that are really well fleshed out. And it reminded me of Watchmen, the show, and the story they built for Hooded Justice, about the idea that society does not want a black superhero. The society wants a white superhero, someone that looks like them, someone who does not come from a disadvantaged or marginalized race or social group, whatever you want to call it. And so it's interesting to watch Anthony Mackie go from someone who doesn't want the shield to someone who takes on the shield but chooses to represent it in a way that he feels is right. And I think if you ever want to watch a show, that's probably the reason to watch it, is to just see his growth from point A to point B. Otherwise, it falls trap to a lot of the other Marvel stuff. Like, the jokes kind of fall flat. The action, I think, is very choppy. So if you remember, I think it was Civil War, where like there are a bunch of jump cuts, so much so that you get a little dizzy sometimes. I think there's a lot of this in that. The CGI sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. I mean, they obviously put a lot of money into it, and it works okay. But I mean, the Winter Soldier is a guy with a silver arm, and the Falcon has wings. Like, how interesting could that possibly be? Yeah. I think the interesting part is the return of Baron Zemo. I think Daniel Bruhl is a very good actor. I really like that part of it. And the antagonist, Carly Morgenthau, who is played by Erin Kellyman, who is the classic terrorist to the good guys, but a freedom fighter for the quote unquote bad guys. And I think it's a very interesting argument that she makes. Obviously, it ends the way you think it does. The good guys win, the bad guys lose. But I think there's an interesting arc to her story, and also an interesting arc to John Walker, who's played by Wyatt Russell, Kurt Russell's kid, who temporarily takes up the mantle of Captain America, but by all accounts is not Steve Rogers, because he does not have a heart of gold. He is this impulsive, angry white male who, I mean, gives a lot for his country, but I think becomes a little disillusioned because he believes in himself a little too much. He becomes this little, to be honest, an entitled bitch.
Okay. Well, then I guess the question becomes, like, obviously it has its merits, and for hardcore Marvel fans who are going to be the ones who vacuum up every little bit of Marvel content, whether it's on Disney Plus or the movie theaters when those are back in swing, you're preaching to the choir in many aspects. So my problem is that I'm in this mindset where I have to pick and choose which of these things I'm going to watch, because there's, if Disney had their way, you would never stop watching anything other than Disney content.
I know the other show I've been watching is Mighty Ducks, so I know.
Yeah. So, and I just know that, like, there's plenty of other good shows on other platforms, whether it's HBO or Netflix or Prime, not to mention new movies coming out. So, I mean, I can't mainline the Marvel stuff in the way that they would like me to. So I sort of made the call when I heard this show was coming out that I probably wasn't going to watch it unless somebody convinced me that it was, like, transformational. It was going to totally change my life. And as good as it sounds from your description, I still don't think I'm going to put in the time on this one. So, like, if you're talking to somebody who's like me, who liked WandaVision well enough, but still plans to, be mostly plugged into the Marvel Universe, what is the most important stuff that we should know plot-wise about Captain Falcon, so that we're not totally in the dark when we go to watch the next Marvel movie?
Well, okay, so like, because I'm not as invested in the MCU as a lot of other people are, but certainly there are threads that kind of that are left hanging. The main part is that the Winter Soldier and Captain Falcon are good friends. The Falcon has taken on the mantle of Captain America, and the new movie that was just announced, so Captain America 4 basically, will have Anthony Mackie in the lead role as Captain America. This time he's just got wings and he's black.
Did they pump him full of super serum so that he can, like, you know?
No, so that was one of like the main points about his character, was that someone had asked him hypothetically, if he was offered the super soldier serum, would he have taken it? And his answer was no. Compared that to John Walker, who was the sort of temporary Captain America, who kind of becomes a villain by the end. He's like, yeah, for sure. If someone offered to me 100%, I would take it in a heartbeat. And he had a black partner too, like a crime fighting duo. And his partner was the same. He's like, yeah, I would take it 100%. Like, could you imagine what I could do with it? And so that was supposed to represent, I think, the difference between people who want to be heroes and the people who are asked to be heroes. So if you remember, going back to Steve Rogers, he didn't really... Yeah,
he didn't want the glory of being a hero, but he wanted to embody heroic traits.
Right, exactly. So that was kind of like the big difference. Sharon Carter comes back. So she is maybe a villain. We don't know for sure. Baron Zemo is broken out of jail and then thrown back in jail again on the raft. It's implied that even from the raft that he has a certain amount of control in the outside world where he's still pulling the strings.
Right. Any good Kingpin type character has something like that going on.
Exactly. Other than that, I don't think you really need to know much. Even in WandaVision, I don't think you need to watch the show to understand what goes on later in the Marvel films. I think you can just assume that even if you've never seen WandaVision, that Scarlet Witch becomes this like really powerful Avenger or witch.
Well, no, and I think they, like, Disney and the Marvel Brain Trust are definitely crafting these shows in such a way that, you know, they can't expect you necessarily to have watched these things to really enjoy the theatrical films, because I think that would be a very dumb idea on their part. You don't want to alienate the movie-going public or anything. So in that case, I feel a little bit better about missing it, honestly.
Well, honestly, like, I think it's fine that you miss it. I think there are certain good elements. As far as, you know, saying the show is good, I mean, I feel like my standards are a little too high sometimes, but I wouldn't categorize this as good. I'd say it's got good parts, but as a whole, I mean, it's decent. I feel like 6 episodes felt a little long. I felt that certain things were a little drawn out, and certain things weren't explored as much. Oh, Julia Louis-Dreyfus makes an appearance, so if you care about that.
That's interesting. But
yeah, she becomes sort of a pawn. It's not entirely clear whether she's good or evil, but she clearly has an agenda of her own. So she's, I guess, an anti-hero, anti-villain. I don't even know what you'd call her. But that was the big surprise cameo for me, that Julia Louis-Dreyfus came in. But you're into Loki, right?
I'm into the idea because, like, Owen Wilson's in there, and it's got a more, like, it's connected to the Thor side of the universe, which is always the chunk that kind of intrigued me the most, the kind of cosmic angle to the MCU.
Yeah, also because it's Taika Waititi too, right?
Yeah, totally. Like that whole chunk of it is my favorite piece of it. So, you know, if I'm going to be picking and choosing, I got to go in that direction.
Real quick, did you watch the trailer for Shang-Chi and the 10 Rings?
I did.
Did you have any initial thoughts?
All I was left thinking about was I don't see the connective tissue between this and the rest of the MCU yet. I'm sure they will make that painfully obvious in the actual movie.
It does feel detached, eh?
Yeah, it feels more just like a standard martial arts film, which I guess maybe is the point. Because if they're going to do a movie set in that world and then present you with crappy martial arts, like Iron Fist did for the Netflix Defenders show.
Let's not talk about Iron Fist.
Because that show was supposed to be all about martial arts, and it was awful. awful from top to bottom. Specifically, the fight scenes were really, really bad. So yeah, I mean, in the case of Shang-Chi, if they nail that and if they can convince you that they can make this kind of martial arts film in the MCU and then I guess branch it out to connect it with the mythology, then that's okay.
Do you think Ben Kingsley makes an appearance?
Isn't he supposed to play like a washed up actor or something?
Well, he's supposed to be like a decoy for the Mandarin. And so Tony Leung is supposed to play the Mandarin, the real Mandarin this time. So I wonder if Ben Kingsley's gonna appear in this one, and hopefully he dies a painful death because that's what his character deserves.
Well, I was entertained though by everyone who are like hardcore fans of Wong Kar-wai on film Twitter,
right?
Speculating over what the press junket will be like for Tony Leung on Shang-Chi, because there'll be a lot of like, influencer types at the press junkets peppering Tony Leung with questions about Marvel fandom and stuff, and he just won't be able to answer anything.
Really? Oh, that'd be interesting.
I don't know. I mean, maybe the man is a hardcore Marvel fan and he could take them with the best of them, but
if you sign up to be in a Marvel film, you kind of have to be a hardcore Marvel fan, don't you? It's a cult, Rob. It's a cult.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've seen a lot of Chinese stars get kind of brought over into Hollywood, and they're there for the money, man. They don't actually engage with this stuff.
I think it's also because in some ways they don't get credit for their talent.
That's true. Yeah. When you have a Transformers movie that's like, hey, starring Fan Bingbing, like now we can market it in China and make some extra bank. Like, yeah, that feels exploitative for sure.
Exactly. In the meantime, we're just gonna cut out the scenes because they're not needed. But we'll put you back in the Chinese version.
Yeah.
The only thought I kind of had was after watching the trailer for Shang-Chi was that like Asian action movies just don't seem to excite me unless it's John Woo and it's got gunplay in it.
Right.
And Awkwafina is very annoying. Instead of like the loud Jewish girl in every movie, she's the loud Asian girl.
Right. I guess she's typecasting herself a little bit there. Yeah.
Anyway, I think that does it for the show.
Yeah. So head over to kinetoscope.ca where, like I said, you can get a full review of Stowaway, a review of Mortal Kombat from Jason, and looking ahead to episodes to come in the future, we have another bonus episode in the works. We haven't decided on a topic yet. I've got to do that. That's on my to-do list. But that's coming up, and it is looking like the gears of Hollywood are grinding back into motion. So there are new movies coming out finally, big releases. Maybe we might actually get Fast 9, F9 in the not too distant future. Summer movie season is maybe not totally lost. Who knows? So you can look forward to things like that in the future here on the show. But until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.